Hello, I'm Eileen Farnood, and welcome back to another episode of the Plastic Shift podcast. Today I'll be speaking with Dr. Thava Palanisami, a senior lecturer at the Global Innovative Centre for Advanced Nanomaterials at the University of Newcastle, Australia. Dr. Palanisami has conducted research regarding the weathering and aging of microplastics and the transfer of microplastics within the food chain. He and his team have co-led the Australian Microplastic Assessment Project, as well as the UON Pacific Plastic Waste Management Program, and his research strives to fill in the knowledge gaps surrounding the issue of microplastics and the plastic pollution problem as a whole. All right, so thank you so much for joining today. Just to kick things off, could you briefly explain your research regarding microplastics and describe what microplastics are for those who might not know?
Yeah, so microplastics are small plastic fragments. This can be either produced intentionally or broken down in the environment. And normally it is anything less than 5 millimeter considered as microplastics. And this definition is not official, it can change. But less than 5 millimeter is called microplastics. So my research is about fate and behavior of microplastics in the environment and its relevance to human health.
Mm-hmm. And what have you found so far pertaining to the effects of microplastics on human health?
Yeah, so interesting question. Actually, so far the microplastic research, it's only scratched the surface. There's a lot of hidden research which is yet to come. And the data mostly so far focused on marine plastics, but there are plastics everywhere. So the plastics from marine can come to terrestrial, from terrestrial it can go to marine. So simply it is in our food chain. So that means the food chain is the number one route for human health exposure. And the second one is the air. So atmospheric inhalation is another one. So those particles can come from industrial emission and also tire debris and various other atmospheric dust activities.
Mm-hmm. And how are microplastics going both into the ocean and into the air?
Yeah, so microplastics, it's generated from the terrestrial environment, land-based environment.
Mm-hmm.
It enters through mainly stormwater and wastewater. If you know, most of the wastewater around the world either partially or fully treated and released into the marine environment. And wastewater is one of the major sources of microplastics in the marine environment. And saying that, these are all microplastic, we can say primary microplastic, but the large plastic bottles and objects thrown in the environment and poor plastic waste management, that's again carries the plastics into the marine environment. That's where the issue. So more than 300 million tons have been quoted to found in the marine environment, and that's the issue. What happened? Those plastics over the time, due to various environmental factors, it can break down into micro and nanoplastics.
Mm-hmm. And have you been able to, let's say, like quantify how much microplastics are moving up the food chain? Like if I were to eat a fish which has ingested microplastics, will I be consuming all the microplastics that the fish ate as well?
Yeah, good. That's also a good question. So we have done last year, we have done a study. We had this question. There's so many papers published, and it's saying it's in the fish, it's in the salt, and it's in the water. And in that case, we want to bring a common value by comparing all the published study to understand how much actually, if it is in the food chain, how much I will be ingesting. And then we reviewed all the papers reporting the food chain microplastic contamination. And then we found out this data, out of 100 papers, there are only 50% meets the quality criteria. Most of the data, it's not discussed properly and methodologically poor as well. So we screened and used around 52 studies to derive a calculation for human ingestion. And again, our calculation, when we published as a report, we were very clear. The highest concentration, highest grams of microplastic human can potentially ingest throughout the world is up to 5 gram. So up to 5 gram means that's maximum in a worst case scenario. So the lowest can be, ideally we want to see 0, so no ingestion, but lowest it's around 0.2 grams per week. So that's not something we measure. It's something already scientists around the world, including Canada, USA, they have reported that they found it. So if they found it in the food, and it has to go to the human health, right? It has to go into our intestine.
Mm-hmm. And with regards to these fish or other species ingesting microplastics, have you found that there are particular traits that make like certain species more susceptible to consuming microplastics?
No, generally, one of the recent papers published has confirmed that organisms in the lower food chain are of more risk than higher food chain. So in our study also we found in the lower food chain means, the primary producers such as Daphnia, algae, Artemia and all. So these particles can block their nutrient uptake process, and then this will eventually, starve, and it doesn't cause mortality, but it causes a chronic effect. That means long-term effect.
Mm-hmm.
But higher organisms is actually, it's not affected by plastics.
Mm-hmm. And also with regards to human consumption, what have you found to be some of the effects that ingesting microplastics has had on humans?
No, to be honest, there's no study looked at the direct impact of human health. The reason is it costs a lot of money. So we have been trying to get sufficient funding to start our work, but we are doing small work using our model organisms. And it's actually, the effect can be different, direct and indirect. But if you want to understand the effect of plastics on human health, there is already sufficient data. So, for example, chemicals leaching out of plastic packaging. So, for example, chemicals called BPA, bisphenol A, that's directly related to plastics. So, the BPA is a potential carcinogen, and this was the reason now BPA is not added into the plastic as a plasticizer. And similarly, phthalates and some of the heavy metals also can come out of plastic. So these studies are already there. What we don't have is the size-based implications of these effects. So if you are ingesting, that's the reason I'm going back to our outcome that has huge value for the scientific community. Because if anybody want to conduct human health, they have the baseline data. So when you conduct human health, you wouldn't conduct based on clean scenario. You have to expose yourself in a worst case scenario and derive the risk. So our study is directly helping ongoing and future research. And we also got several inquiries from European Research Council and National Academy of Science that appreciating this data helps them set up the human health exposure studies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. I know, like, based off of data collected, like the general microplastic problem has been getting worse over the past few years, specifically in the sense that there's been just more and more microplastics found in the ocean. Why do you think that this has been the case? Like, why do you think that more and more plastics are ending up in our ocean and plastic pollution has been worsening?
The thing is, plastic is a good material. It is not actually purposefully designed to be dumped in the aquatic environment, not just ocean, but it's just a poor waste management. And also, because it's cheap, we started kind of overusing it. There are several materials, plastic alternative materials, which you can use it very well, but we still use plastic for unwanted purpose. So that's end up increasing the waste load. So then not all the countries has a good waste management procedures in place. And also some of the natural disasters like developing countries, monsoon rainfall and flooding is common. So in that scenario, they have mostly open landfill. So most of the plastics are easily carried away and washed out. So it's actually first thing avoiding the plastics, and second reducing the plastic. These two are the steps that can actually reduce the flow of plastic.
Mm-hmm. And with regards to microplastics, do you think that there's certain regions which have been producing more and more microplastics in comparison to other parts of the world?
No, look, the data-wise, what it says is actually developed countries, somehow we are exposing ourselves into lots of microplastic. Load is high. The reason is, for example, in our recent paper, we revealed that for the first time, glitters is actually ignored microplastics. And glitters is everybody, all the school kids, everybody uses glitters. That's how we party. But that's more common in the developed countries than in developing countries. In developing countries, what we see is, I'm from developing countries originally, what we see is they use lots of mega plastic, the large plastics. But in developed countries, this is one of the scenario where glitter usage is still not phased out and still not recommended for any biodegradable alternates. So that load is almost more than 54% of the microplastic we found in the wastewater plant. So like that, there are articles still coming. You would have seen nanoplastics in the tea bags, and there's so many studies are coming. So I don't think it's actually geographic dependent. It's actually our lifestyle. It's a lifestyle dependent.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that like in developing countries, the types of plastic that they use are less likely to generate microplastics.
Yeah.
Do you know what are like the specific types of plastics which are more likely
No,
to
I want
generate?
to be clear here. What I mentioned is there are two types of microplastic, right? Primary microplastic, which is produced intentionally, and secondary microplastic is breakdown product. So primary microplastics in developed countries, because of different lifestyle, and we do inadvertently we do use a lot of these microplastics. Okay, but in developing countries, their lifestyle is all job related, and there is a lot of plastic carry bags and packaging materials, and they don't have a proper waste management facilities. Okay, so the whatever they're using is directly released into the marine environment. That's actually lead into the secondary microplastic. So there is a big difference. Okay, so for example, when we surveyed in developing countries, like I have a team member in Nigeria and Thailand and India as well. So most often they found is the major, like large plastics. But down the track, if you see, we have done some beach samples in developing countries. We see lots of broken down microplastic, the secondary microplastic. So that effect is there everywhere. It's not just developed countries or developing; it's everywhere, irrespective of region. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is plastic is everywhere, not just highly populated place, even in Arctic and Antarctic. So it doesn't spare the geographic region.
I see. So do you think, given that like there is this big issue of plastic pollution and specifically with respect to microplastics, do you think it's possible that we could solve this issue of just the sheer amount of microplastics that's been getting into the oceans? Or do you think that
it is definitely possible to stop the flow of microplastic? That's definitely possible. And in our research, because we don't just research on marine microplastic, we research on 12 different research themes. So also all our research, we link it to the solution. For example, if our research shows this may lot of microplastics are being released in the wastewater. So then we have directed our research into what can we do about it? How do we stop the flow of microplastics from this particular source? So then we have developed a couple of technologies that can actually stop not only microplastics, also other toxic chemical contaminants being released from the wastewater plant. Like that, there are several techniques, methods available to stop or reduce the flow of microplastics into the environment. But it starts from the common citizens, though. We have to reduce the use of unwanted plastics. So once you reduce that, then you're plugging the source, then we can start looking at the technologies which can filter out or remove the plastics from our water source. But what is already in the environment, it is actually nature's call. So we can, how do we are going to, what is floating in the marine environment? Yes, of course, we can filter out. But one of the recent studies in Science Journal is saying we have more microplastics in the sediment, ocean sediment, than in the water. So it's highly likely we can clean all those things, but we have to develop a knowledge on the fate of those microplastics in the various compartments. That's what we are doing most often. What happens, and if it is in the hot spot or in a particular spot, how long it will take to degrade, and what mechanism it will adapt, and is the microorganism found on the plastic has any potential to degrade. And those are all going to be slow process, and this is a long-term issue.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on biodegradable plastic?
Biodegradable plastic is good, nothing wrong, as long as it is not compromising the food source. So there is a misinformation that biodegradable plastics are directly produced from food crops, but that's the wrong way. Biodegradable plastic can be produced from many other waste material. It's actually a good thing if biodegradable plastics are produced, a genuine biodegradable plastic. I'm not talking about also degradable. Produced through, there are plenty of waste materials, agriculture waste materials, food waste, all those can be used. And also there is a trend that everybody can produce biodegradable plastic. Every organization goes, no, this is not right. You need a lot of scientific understanding to produce a good bioplastic. Otherwise, you are actually causing more problem. So they need to understand the policies. They need to understand the degradation mechanism. They need to understand the usage. So bioplastic, it's growing, but it's good as long as it's not compromising the food production, and which is possible.
Mm-hmm. In general, I know that you mainly focus on microplastics, but what are some other problems that you think people should be working on to tackle the plastic pollution problem?
What do you mean by other problems?
Do you think there's any other aspects of plastic pollution, like maybe waste management or other issues which you think are very pertinent that we should be focusing on right now?
Yeah, look, waste management, yes, definitely there is a huge role to play. And such as you can actually, plastic is a valuable material. Instead of promoting recycling, I know recycling is good for some time, but it's actually downcycling. Instead of promoting, if you promote upcycling, which is extracting value out of these plastics, and then you're actually, incentivize people for following the proper waste management. So if you incentivize, then people will dispose properly because they're getting money. And also upcycling is a very good thing. You can, because plastic is very valuable material, you can get a lot of value out of it. So in my center, my collaborators and colleagues, they're actually producing next generation carbon material from plastic waste, which can be used in the power generation and batteries. So those kind of things, it will actually attract and incentivize people, and then it will help waste management. Rather than, if you make a bench out of 1,000 bottles, and so far, no studies on the safety of it. So we are actually not removing the plastic, we are just keeping the plastics in the environmental cycle. That's a bit of concern, but if you upcycle, you are actually removing out from the environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually haven't heard about that. Well, yeah, I think that's all the questions that I have for you today. I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with me. I know you're really busy, and you shared a lot of really interesting insights on microplastics.